Hello, everyone. Pleasure to see you all here today. As you, if you've been here before, you know I'm John Rougeux, and this is our latest live interview in AMA. We've been doing these about every couple of weeks now, and today we're going to talk about all things Bitcoin. So, to kind of help us keep tabs on what's happened and to talk about what we might expect in 2023. We thought it would be fun to do kind of a year in review on Bitcoin, which is why I'm thrilled to have Gabe Higgins here with us today. So Gabe has been highly engaged in the Bitcoin community since about 2012, I think. He's the co-author of a book called Thank God for Bitcoin. He leads the largest Bitcoin meetup in Florida. He's even consulted for the Secret Service, Department of Homeland Security, and I think the Florida Blockchain Task Force. And on top of all that, he's also our co-founder and chief blockchain officer at BlockSpaces. So, he and his team have been building a lot of interesting things on Lightning, among other things as well. But in other words, if you want to talk Bitcoin, Gabe is your man. So, Gabe, awesome to have you here today.
It's good to be here, John. Excited.
What are some of the kind of like salient points, some of the milestones that happened over the last 12 months in the Bitcoin space?
Yeah, there's obviously a lot. This year has been a very interesting year, to say the least. But specifically with Bitcoin, right? It was about this time last year that the latest kind of major update or upgrade in Bitcoin happened, and that was with Taproot. Taproot enabled new functionalities, new capabilities on Bitcoin that had been talked about for years, of course, and this has been building for years, but it was finally integrated into the protocol. So that has kind of for this whole year, that's kind of kicked off this whole new wave of innovation, building on Bitcoin and on layer twos, such as Lightning Network and other sidechains. The new capabilities that Bitcoin has now, without increasing any overhead as far as block size goes, we have more capabilities and functionality, increased functionality, without increasing the costs, without increasing the size of a transaction, and we can create infinitely more complex transactions now. So that is really exciting to see, these scaling capabilities that are now on Bitcoin, that are just now kind of coming to fruition, starting to be built and starting to come to light.
Real quick, just for someone who's not technical and hasn't read some of the documentation on Taproot, can you just walk us through what that development is? Like, you talked about some functionality it enables, but what are the specific things that unlocks?
So it introduced a new kind of digital signature that is more compact. It doesn't take up as much transaction space. So it's more compact and more secure to boot. So there's just to put it very simply, that's kind of that in a nutshell. With Taproot, it enabled that the functionality to increase while maintaining the same size transaction. So it's a really it's a technical feat that hasn't been done before, and it's really exciting to see how that is kind of playing out now.
That's an interesting topic in and of itself, like where Bitcoin can go, because before this year, I'd never even considered the idea of like smart contracts being on Bitcoin, right? So but now that's through Lightning Network. So where do you see Bitcoin functionality going over the next, let's say, year or so?
Yeah, well, so there's a lot of discussion and release of protocols that are happening right now. Probably one of the big ones is called Taro, which is being spearheaded by Lightning Labs. And what this does is basically enable complete Turing complete functionality on top of the Lightning Network. So any kind of tokens, any kind of automated DeFi automated market makers, DeFi applications are now being explored on Lightning Network. And the benefit there is that the transaction cost and the speed is extremely fast. So again, we're able to take the security of the base layer of Bitcoin and without disrupting the consensus model either, building on top of that, right, on this second layer that doesn't require waiting for blocks and doesn't require confirmation times. It's instant settlement, lightning fast, and it's just crazy how the functionality of this is just opening up a whole host of possibilities.
And on the topic of trust and where Bitcoin's going, bringing it back to 2022 with recent events, right, with FTX, and now there's some unconfirmed drama with Binance. That situation's hairy. I would just recommend anyone just go look it up. But with that, do you think all of this, even if the worst case scenario is true with Binance, do you think that's going to hurt Bitcoin in the short to midterm in terms of how people develop on it, or is it going to help? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't think it really impacts the development of Bitcoin. Certainly, all this drama has been, in my mind, really kind of a positive, although it's been terrible for people who've lost money. Obviously, that should never happen. And the reason for this technology is specifically so that cannot happen.
Right.
And yet it's still happening because people are not utilizing this technology as it should be. Having a more focused on building self-custodian solutions, making it super easy for users that are not super, techie or familiar with how any of this works, dumbing it down to where it's super easy for them to interact with this stuff and not rely on a centralized authority. You are communicating with a protocol through a dashboard, and you just point and click, and then the things happen. But what's making it happen in the background isn't a company; it's a protocol, and you're relying on that protocol to operate how the protocol is built. And that is backstopped by who builds it and who tests it and who's running on it. The trust in these third-party entities has to go away. Unfortunately, humans, we have to learn the hard way sometimes, and we have to experience the pain to really see the value in having something like DeFi applications, DeFi exchanges, self-custody wallets, and why those are important, and why it takes worth knowing, right? Taking the time to learn these things and learn about them, how to use them, is worth it.
I was just going to say, it seems like almost from a customer perspective and from the perspective of most companies out there, not, I'm not going to like throw anyone or an industry like under the bus, but it's like self-custody, like non-custodial solutions in this space is hard. It's the hard way to do it. And so no one wants to do it. It's just an interest, it's just interesting overall. And it alludes to what Gabe was just saying. Like, yeah, it's just a weird, I guess it's not weird, right? But just the negative, the possible negative externalities of not having control and having another entity in control for you. That is just, that definitely has to change. I agree with Gabe 100%.
One of the things that I saw early on that really kind of clicked with me or resonated with me while I was learning about Bitcoin in its early days, there was the event at Cyprus, Greece, where they did a bail-in, where they shut all the banks down, all the ATMs, restricted access to everybody's accounts, and then took a haircut of 20% off of all of depositors across the board to bail themselves out of their financial crisis. And that was the first time Bitcoin shot over $100. And so when I saw Bitcoin reacting to those geopolitical events, that's when it dawned on me how big of a deal this was, that this was going to radically change how things operate in the future, and to the highest levels, to nation state levels. So I think this is where kind of like we're going to start to see a real shift in positioning on like what is a nation state's Bitcoin strategy. I think that's going to be a real conversation. If it's not already happening, it's kind of tangentially happening with CBDCs. That's kind of like in a backhanded way discussing Bitcoin and the impact of Bitcoin, because they still want to, with CBDCs, obviously central banks still want to maintain that control and maintain that authority. I think there's going to be a real tug and pull there, and I think we're already starting to see countries taking a position in some way, shape, or form on that. Of course, China banning mining through the whole country, where Bitcoin was predominantly mined in China before that. And then we just saw how Bitcoin's network just routed around China in a couple months. It was remarkable to see that. And now we're seeing Bitcoin's hash rate at all-time highs, or at least recently it was at all-time highs, which means the miners haven't stopped hashing. The Bitcoin network hasn't dropped a beat. It's continuing to pump out blocks every 10 minutes. So that has been also remarkable to see that how anti-fragile this network is, even from probably the largest nation state attack that you could possibly do on Bitcoin. And it had no effect. It had zero effect.
Dana, I think we've had a few questions come through. Do you want to queue those up so we can allocate some time to those?
Yeah, absolutely. So we got several questions from Richard, but I want to start off with this one because it kind of piggybacks off of our conversation about energy a bit. Richard asks, any opinions on the recent announcement of nuclear fusion and its potential on removing a negative of Bitcoin mining?
Fusion, yeah, that's been a very interesting topic as of late. Anything that makes energy cheaper and taps into renewable energy sources, Bitcoin is the king at that. Bitcoin, if you took Bitcoin as an industry in and of itself, it is the single best use of renewable energies right now on the planet. There's no other industry that's using renewable energy more than Bitcoin. So if you're for renewable energies, you should be for Bitcoin, because it is giving a perfect use case for renewable energies in a way that no other industry has been able to demonstrate so far. So if we could tap into fusion energy, nuclear fusion, that would be amazing. And it would just help increase security for the network. Yeah.
Our next question is, we're kind of looking ahead into the new year. It's from Ted, and he wants to know, is there a glaring single headwind or a grouping of headwinds that Bitcoin faces in 2023?
The biggest glaring headwind I see is regulatory. With this fallout with FTX and several other bankruptcies that has transpired in the latter half of this year. There's a lot of attention, obviously, towards regulation. And I think that's a problem. I think we were better suited when the regulators kind of just like brushed this off as a little hobbyist thing that, wasn't really transacting a whole lot of dollars or putting a lot of people at risk. But that's not where we are anymore. So those discussions are going to be increasingly important to pay attention to. And really, there's a lot of industry folks that are trying to, talk to the regulators and help them understand, like, look, don't overreact about this, because this is important, and this could affect how, like we mentioned earlier, the geopolitical strategy. If we end up, having a heavy hand like China, that could be extremely detrimental in the future. So we don't want to move quick in regards to regulations, especially. I mean, I was listening to the FTX hearing yesterday, and yeah, these congressmen, they have zero clue what they're talking about. Let's be honest.
Yeah, one of them made a comment of like he still thought crypto was basically for terrorists who want to hide their money, right? And that's such an antiquated view of things.
Well, it's not only antiquated, it's just false.
It's wrong.
It's like
hide your money on a
we
public blockchain.
we run chain analytics on this constantly, and you know, the vast majority of illegal activity is not happening in Bitcoin. It's happening with the US dollar in traditional banks.
This one is definitely, I've seen a lot of headlines about this, so I'm interested in your answer, Gabe. But Richard asked, what impact do lost coins have on the entire landscape?
Yeah, it's always interesting to question the lost coins, and I mean I've lost keys to coins, so you're welcome. If you own Bitcoin, I essentially what that does is it just it basically gives back to everybody else that owns Bitcoin, right? Because you're effectively if you lost coins, what that means is that you have lost your private keys to be able to spend those Bitcoins, which means that they're locked in there forever and they're never moving. And it's impossible to know which coins are actually lost. There's only rough guesstimates. We're seeing constantly where wallets that are 10, 12 years old, where coins that were minted in the early days of Bitcoin have just now moved for the first time ever. So where we might have thought those were lost before, right? Because we assume that somebody lost those keys because they haven't moved, but now they're moving. So it's impossible to know whether or not coins are actually lost. So it's hard to gauge, but essentially that all that does is give back. That's why you got to manage your keys.
All right. Well, that's about all the time we have, Gabe. It was awesome chatting with you today. And just as a heads up, in a couple of weeks, we're going to do our next live interview in AMA. It's going to be with Alex from our team. We're going to talk about how Bitcoin fits into the broader Web3 ecosystem. So it'll be a nice kind of continuation of this thread. So be on the lookout for an invite for that. But until then, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here. Man, great insights. Really, really appreciate you being here. If someone wants to get in touch with you after this, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can reach out on Twitter. It's probably a good way. Just look me up, Gabe B for Bitcoin Higgins. That's my handle. Just ping me there. My DMs are open, I think, except for scammers.
Okay. If you're a scammer, don't ping Gabe, but everyone else, you're good to go.